Hi everyone, welcome back to another continuing education check-in. And today we're tackling one of the big boys. We're talking about should you live with them before marriage? And this is a controversial topic. It's interesting. I wanted to talk about this because Sania, when we were first starting this podcast up, we shared our views on a bunch of different relationship things, and this was actually one of the things that we aligned on.
Oh, really?
But then over time, I think our views kind of changed. And then even most recently, you just told me that your views might have changed on
like
this
this
too.
morning, I texted you. Or last night.
Yeah. So I kind of want to know, where do you stand on this topic now?
Okay.
And what are your thoughts?
Should we start by telling our viewers? Okay, so our views before that did align. Where we started off was we both thought like it's not required. I don't want to say it's not a good idea, but like you don't need to live with your partner before making things more serious.
Oh, interesting. So my view was you shouldn't live with them before marriage. Not that it's not required, but it's not as helpful as most people think.
Okay, that's a good way of saying it, and I had agreed with that view. I think the reason my views kind of changed is I think a lot of it the changes depend on who you're talking to. So if like your circle, if that's like a super common thing in your immediate friend group, and you can see all like the positive things in it, and you talk to more people that are pro live with them first. I think I'm very easily convinced, so I'd sort of like started to believe that like maybe it's not that bad. Not that you have to do it. I'm not eager or like excited about it, but I'm like maybe it's not the end of the world, because like I realized like, you know, like even with friendships were great until I lived with them, and then like everything blew up, and I'm like, what if I'm married to somebody and that happens?
Yeah.
You know? But that's also the same argument, Ethan, that last night I was using like, wait, like what if I'm like not married to them and we're living together, and what if we blow up and it doesn't work? So it's like a double-edged thing for me, sort of.
Yeah.
So right now I fall on the side of I'm gonna be in the middle.
Okay. That's
unfortunately not a hot take, but like you can live with someone, but like also it's no big deal if you don't, and like it's okay if you don't. That shouldn't be a requirement, I think.
Okay, I think that is a hot enough take, because you're open to it, but then you're kind of open to both sides.
Yeah.
And so your views will be very important this episode, because you can talk on both sides.
Okay. What about you, Ethan? Where do you fall?
So I've always stayed the same.
Okay.
And I know this is also a hot take. Like either extreme is going to be a hot take.
Yeah, definitely.
But like I genuinely think that I need to clarify a little bit. So I think that for myself, I would never live with my partner before marriage.
Okay.
And I think a lot of that is shaped by my faith and values. And I will get into that more. And so I think that if you have similar faith and values to me, like as a Christian, then I wouldn't recommend that you live with your partner before marriage. And then I can kind of explain.
Okay.
And then in general, I do think that it's not as helpful as most people think.
Yeah, I do. I can agree with you on that part.
Okay. So I actually want you to start off, Sania. What are some reasons why you became more open-minded to living with your partner? Or hypothetically, not saying that you personally would. Right.
Yeah. I think I also have, Ethan, very similar like faith and values. Like obviously I'm Muslim, but similar ideas. You know, you don't typically live with somebody before you marry them and things like that. I think it was just because of like I've always lived with like just my family, and like it's common culture to like go from living with your family to living in your married home with your husband. Like that's just like the progression of things. But then I think lately, I don't know if like because the world just feels so small now and you have so many options, and because of all this and that, now it's kind of been like presented to me as like, oh, why not have somebody that you're compatible living with, you know? So like, and again, it made me think about it more and more because of like roommate experiences. And I was just like I heard some of my older married couples like talking, and you know, like I know somebody who he has to like redo the dishes after his wife does them. He always has to re-clean. Like she can try to clean, but he'll he'll give it the final touch. And it's like, personally, like, just hearing that, I was like, I'd be so frustrated. Like, I've had guests over at my house, like friends come over, and, you know, they try to be helpful, and they're like, oh, let me do the dishes. And then, like, the moment they leave, I'm like, okay, now let me actually clean everything.
Yeah.
And I was like, if that became, like, a daily occurrence, like, I don't think I would be, like, my most happiest self. Is it, like, a make or break? Like, no. That couple that, you know, where the husband goes in and re-cleans after his wife, like, they're happily married. But I think it's like, oh, why not also make sure that, like, I don't have to clean up after you, for example. Like, little things, little tendencies that you only find out if you're living with your partner or if you're just spending a lot of time at each other's house. I think that's why I'm, like, not so, like, oh, you have to live with them to find this out. Because if you're, like, cooking together, you're going to figure it out regardless, you know?
Right. And so I hear you on that. You're saying that you want to understand them better, like understand their habits at home, and that way you know those things before you jump into a marriage, so that you don't end up in a situation where it's extra stress on you or extra burden where you have to, like, clean up after them, and you're not, like, you don't have to do that for the rest of your life.
Right.
But then my question is, this whole time we've been doing this relationship podcast, we've been trying to steer people in a direction where they can pick and choose partners carefully, intentionally, and go through this relationship thing with a game plan,
right,
a solid game plan. But in everything that we've talked about so far, we've never talked about living habits being
right,
like
on
being like a huge deal breaker.
Right. It's not on the checklist, really.
Right. And so now, like, are you saying that it kind of is on the checklist because it's something you want to make sure about?
It's still not on the checklist. Like I said, that couple that did not try to live together, they still have this issue, and they're totally happily married, like, so in love with each other. I don't think it's a checklist thing, but it's more so because there's such a surplus of options, and it sort of feels like you can be pickier and be like, oh, like, if I don't like their habits, like, we don't have to get married. Like, you can just, like, it's another thing to filter people out based off of.
Okay, that was wild what you just said. And I don't know if you guys noticed today, but Sania started off with the Delulu glasses on her side, and I seriously think you might need to put them on right now.
I was going to put them on, but I was like, wait, tell me why you think I'm being Delulu.
Okay, but if you agree with me, you're going to put them on?
Fair enough.
Okay, so tell me not that, like, it sounds crazy to me that, let's say you have the perfect guy in front of you. He's very family oriented. He has the same values as you. He's very supportive. Is very intentional in the dates that he plans, the conversations that you have. You want the same things in life. Let's say that his bathroom is a mess when you go over. You're telling me that you're gonna pass on a guy like that because he doesn't know how to clean his bathroom?
Okay, fine. Maybe I'll backtrack a little. Still not putting on the glasses, but let me just say it like this.
Okay.
No, if I have found the perfect guy, if I'm that late in the stage of dating, which typically I'm gonna acknowledge that, yes, you typically move in with somebody when you're that late in the stage of dating.
Right.
And so at that point, I feel like if you found the one, you found the one. Like, their bathroom can be dirty.
Right.
But I think sometimes, I have maybe seen it happen here and there, where people will move in together just because, like, of timing, like leases ending, this and that. And they end up living together sooner, like earlier than they even realized if they're the one for each other.
Yeah.
And I feel like at that point, you can use it as a filtering tool.
I see where you're coming from. Now tell me, in those situations that you've seen, because I've seen that too.
Yeah.
Do those relationships tend to work out?
No.
Exactly. Me
Never.
too. And so I think this shows us, like, a couple of different things, where if you move in too early and there isn't a strong foundation of trust and communication, then very easily things can break that. And we've both seen situations like this. And then let's say you wait longer and you guys have a steady relationship, you have communication in check, and you know how to talk through difficult stuff. If you feel like this person is the one that you want to go the distance with, maybe marry, then their bathroom habits or their cleaning habits or whatever home habits is not gonna tip the scales.
Right.
And so that's why I feel like that argument kind of shoots itself in the foot, because at the end of the day, we both recognize that something like that, a home habit, is changeable. And that's why we're not saying it's a deal breaker. Like, we understand that we as people can change. Like, I speak for myself. There was a time in my life where I didn't know how to do chores and be clean. But I've reached a point in my life where that is important to me, and I know how to do that and how to do that well. And it's because someone was able to teach me and encourage me. And so something like that is a process. Just because someone doesn't start off perfect or in line with you doesn't mean that you shouldn't be in a relationship with them.
That's fair.
Yeah. I will support you a little bit. And maybe the thing that we will shift on is, we started off talking about like small home habits, but there are some bigger things that you learn when you live with someone,
Right.
that could be deal breakers.
No, true.
So how they interact with their family, like when they're calling their parents, how do they talk with them? What is their tone? How they deal with money? And so like when you guys are paying rent and
Right.
utilities,
Okay.
getting groceries, like
This is a very
are
good
they
point.
like spending money on like making poor decisions?
Right.
And those are things that you're learning too. I think that's a
true.
valid
That is
statement.
super true. I will go back to the first thing that we were talking about, just like the living habits.
Yeah.
I don't believe ever that you need to live with your partner for like 10 years before you can make a decision.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think, like, I have met people that are like, oh, like, I have to live with them for like X amount of years so I can figure everything out. So I'm 100% sure before I make a decision.
Yeah.
I think that that's like completely not true.
Yeah.
But I do think, these points that you brought up now, thank you for arguing for my side.
I'm not really. I'm going to tear it down really
I see
quickly.
you're setting up the stage, huh? But I do think, there's some important things that you know, that come up. Like, for example, like their day-to-day routine and how that fits with your day-to-day routine. I have a friend that is married, and him and his wife have complete polar opposite sleeping schedules.
Yeah.
She likes to be in bed like 6 to 8 o'clock. Sun could still be out, and like up super early. And he's a night owl. Like, he likes to stay up until midnight.
Yeah.
Of course, now they're married and like they've adjusted, which means he started to go to sleep a little earlier. But, you know, those are like little things that, like, I don't know, maybe for some people that could be make or break.
Yeah, I hear you on that. This is like one of the major points that I want to make on this episode. One of my main takeaways about this topic is that in life, with your partner, no matter how good you guys are, how compatible you guys are, you're going to have difficult conversations. It doesn't matter like how mature you guys are, what stage of life you're in, because life sucks sometimes and the circumstances around us are not ideal.
Yeah.
And a lot of things are out of our control. Like if a family member gets sick or if our car breaks down, those are not things that are necessarily our fault, but it leads to a lot of difficult conversations in our relationship. And so I kind of get the idea that living with someone, you get the reps in and you clear a lot off the plate in terms of difficult conversations, because you have the difficult conversations about money. You have the difficult conversations about how you treat your family and even the family or living situation you would want in the future together. You kind of tick those boxes off. But my point is that you think that you are checking off more boxes and getting to know the other person better. But my point is, as you progress in your relationship, the difficult conversations don't go away.
That's true.
Sure, there might be less at a certain time, but you like checking off those boxes early doesn't mean that like
That you won't have to do them later.
right. And that's my main point. I'm not saying it's not important.
Right.
And people who don't live with their partner before marriage, they're going to have to figure that stuff out later. But my point is, it's more important to build a strategy to tackle these difficult conversations, to build a foundation of trust and assuming the best in the other person, as opposed to just trying to make sure you have as many difficult conversations out of the way as early as possible. And so the next episode, stay tuned for that. Sania and I are going to talk about one of the strategies you can use to have difficult conversations and how to do that well. And so that's why, to me, it's not a strong enough argument to live with someone to understand those big picture things.
I totally agree with you, Ethan. I think, that's what I always also say whenever this topic is brought up to me, that it's like there's going to be so many unforeseen circumstances that you're going to be in. Like, you're never going to fully figure the other person out. Yeah. Because the other person's changing, you're changing, your situation's changing. So, I can give you that one, that you can't ever fully figure somebody out. I will say, for the people that do consider this to be like an item on the checklist, like I have to live with them before I decide to marry them, I think it's often because that's what the norm is in their culture. That's what they've seen in their families. That's what they've seen as something that like gives positive results. Like maybe in yours and my culture, like that is not the typical thing. The typical thing is not that you live with them and then you marry them. Because I also see the downsides of it, which is like, if you're living with them before you marry them, what if you completely disagree on money stuff? Instead of trying to make it work and figure it out and compromise and be together, which is like what you're going to have to do your whole life anyways, you have the option to just be like, okay, well, bye. You disagree with me? Like, let's just say bye to each other. Yeah.
So there's like two big things I want to talk about there. And
I'm losing which side I'm arguing for.
So the first thing is about culture. And actually, like, traditionally, like, I don't know about other cultures, but traditionally, I think it wasn't common for people to live with their partners before marriage. It's a pretty modern idea. Right. And it has shaped modern dating and has like become a big part of our culture now. But I think that in the past it wasn't like that. So like that's one thing that I want to like differentiate. But then also, I don't know off the top of my head, but there are studies that show that when you live with your partner before marriage and then you get married, those marriages are less likely to work out. And so I'm going to search this up and then we'll try to pop it up on the screen.
That's crazy. Okay.
Like which study this was, but it is a common trend. And so, but the thing that we also do know for sure is that divorce rates are going up right now.
In general, yeah.
And so I'm not saying there's a direct correlation because there's many factors that go into this, but in the past, people did not live with their partners before marriage. Right. And now people are doing that more and more.
I think people are just feeling more that they have options, and it's like doing all of these things. I feel like yes, on one side it can help you bring closeness, it can help you be together more, but I think on the other side it's like killing the spark earlier. It's like you have already lived with them and you're still pretty young and you're kind of like, sure, we'll get married, but if it doesn't work out, it's not a big deal to start with somebody new. Right. Like, and I think part of like the higher divorce rates is because culturally it's become more acceptable to like, oh, you're divorced twice, 3 times? Okay, here's your 4th wedding, your whatever. Yeah. So I think there's some societal kind of big shifts going on that may or may not be related to the living together. But I do think I don't know if people would agree with this, but I do think living with your partner before you marry them like does kill the spark. It takes away the fun, the newness, like all the joy that you're supposed to have after you get married. It's like you're opening all your presents before Christmas Day. And so when it's actually Christmas Day, you're like, I already know what I got. Yeah. I'm already wearing the peaches. That was my gift. So I think that's also like an important thing to consider. Like you're kind of robbing yourself of future happiness by doing this.
Yeah. Just a couple of things. So like we see a general trend, right? As our culture shifts in terms of dating and like new ideas like this are accepted, we also see more marriages falling apart. And I'm not saying they're directly correlated. I know I'm gonna get some flack for this, but the whole reason Sania and I are doing this podcast is because there's certain things that are in the dating culture right now that's just not working. Right. And that is true. Not helpful for people. Actually, so we're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, we can call them out.
And there's one thing that you brought up that I love, and this is the other thing that I wanted to touch on before, is that when you live with your partner before marriage, there's a lack of commitment. And so there's like a couple things that this touches. The first thing is that there's so much pressure on both of you. You hinted on this, but just think about it. If it's so easy for you to say, this person doesn't meet my expectations when it comes to living together, I can just leave. That other person is also doing the same to you and evaluating you the same way. That is so much pressure on you because you put yourself in the situation where you have to prove yourself.
Right.
And if you're not compatible in terms of your living style, that person can just leave right away. And that's really hurtful and raises the stakes a lot on you yourself. So yes, you get the freedom and ability to do that to someone else. They get to do that to you. And when there isn't a firm level of commitment where you can fall back on, you never know when the other person can leave.
That's true.
I do want to say, because I know there's a lot of people out there where they feel like they have a really solid foundation of commitment. They have no intention to leave each other. And so that's when they choose to live together. And we both have friends who they don't take living together lightly, and they genuinely believe they have a strong commitment. But then that commitment is not as strong as marriage. And I know in our culture now, like, people don't see marriage as the
I know
ultimate.
marriage has become like a legal thing. I know I have friends that are like, oh, like, I'm committed to you, I'll never leave you, but like, you know, marriage is just legal, it's just paperwork, it's just messy.
Right. So I think we understand, like, some people might not hold marriage to such a high standard. I think for me, holding marriage to that high standard, anything less than that would leave me at least a little bit insecure, because
Definitely.
when crap hits the fan,
Yeah.
and at the end of the day things are not working out, and I'm not married, the other person has every right to leave me.
Yeah.
And so yes, like, you can start off having a really strong commitment, but it's not like marriage. It's not even legally binding at the end of the day.
True. And I will say, I do agree to some extent, Ethan, but I feel like even when you are married, like, it's harder to break that commitment.
Yeah.
And you're more like, you know, it's like levels of like the relationship, and you're like at a deeper level. So it's, you know, and potentially you have kids, your families were involved, if people were at your wedding. So I think it makes it harder to leave, which some people can argue is like maybe why they don't want to be married. Because like we both know there's situations where relationships are super toxic and the person should leave, but they don't have the strength to do it because they're in this marriage. And maybe it would have been easier at an earlier level. But also having the same similar cultural background with you, I also agree that it doesn't feel safe unless it is a marriage. But I think you should, I think it's never safe. Like, I think you have to work at it equally in both cases. You have to know you want to choose each other. Like, you could be in the talking stage, but if you're fully committed and you want to choose each other, like, that could be stronger than some people's marriage committed. Like, people cheat when they're married, like all kinds of stuff. Like, the problems don't go away when people get married, and we understand that. But I think what we're trying to say in this episode is like, why would you put more pressure on the relationship if your relationship isn't that strong yet? I feel like it's like, if you had to like graph it, it's like you're putting all this marriage level pressure, you're living together, you know, you're calling your family every day, you're hosting dinners, you're doing whatever, living your life, but your commitment is only at a level of like, I can only call you my boyfriend, I don't feel comfortable with anything more.
Yeah.
And so that difference is what causes, I think, a lot of problems that wouldn't occur if you waited until you were married to live with them, because now you're at this higher level of commitment. And sure, there's higher level of like, we can call them problems, that the dishes aren't super clean or whatever.
Yeah. I think we also do want to acknowledge that there's kind of like this middle ground. So yes, like, I guess it sounds like we're both on the same page, where if you guys are just dating, it might be too early on. The commitment's not strong enough to live together. And then there's marriage where, like, that is like the context in order to live together. But then there is this middle ground where people will say, we've been dating for X number of years, we're committed, I have every intention to marry this person.
Yeah.
Or you're already engaged and you're like, I'm gonna get married, I might as well live with them. We understand like there is that situation out there, and I think for me, the commitment argument is not as strong at that point, but
I do understand the label makes a difference.
Yeah, and I think for me, there's like two more things holding me back from saying anytime before you're married, even when you're engaged, like it's okay to live with your partner. The thing holding me back is that I think for me, I don't want to tempt myself more than I need to be in terms of physical boundaries and sex.
That is like a really big one that we haven't touched on at all.
Yeah.
And we've sort of been skirting around it, but that is, I totally agree.
Yeah, and not saying that, like, that is not what I want. Because I think when I feel very close to someone, naturally that is what I want. To be physically close with them and intimate.
Yeah, it's a natural instinct.
But I think for me, maybe this needs to be a different episode, but like I genuinely believe that like when you wait to have sex, like when you're married, sex has like it does more than just like physical,
like more than just
pleasure, but it like builds an emotional bond. And like in marriage, it can really strengthen and deepen your relationship. And that's why like a lot of times when you have sex outside of marriage and you're not emotionally on the same level, it can lead to some issues.
Definitely. It's again that same thing of like the commitment versus the action.
Right.
You know, like if you think you're strong enough to do this action and know that, you know, the other person, they're only dating you, they can cheat.
Yeah.
But again, the argument here is also that can also still happen when you're in a marriage. It's just easier to step outside of a relationship, or like it's easier to be at a disconnect of like, oh, what are we when you're doing this thing before marriage. Marriage just provides like a legally binding safety net that says, okay, you guys are both in this at the same level. Like it'll be equally messy for both of you if you decide, if either one of you messes up, and you're both committing to each other at the same level. Like there's a more even understanding, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I do want to challenge that a little bit. Marriage is legally binding. And as we know, like, even that can be broken. But in my view, like, marriage has way more implications than that. Like, in terms of your faith and how, like, you as a person are now, like, united with another person in front of God. I won't like, but then also like in terms of like your community, that you now have like a different family unit,
right? And
people don't see you the same way anymore. Like your outward perception to the different communities that you're part of, work, friendships, your own like hometown, you have a new identity,
right?
And so that is like, I think the last big point that I want to bring up, which is if you say your commitment is that strong, and so you can live with them, and when there are problems, you're going to work it out and you're not going to just leave, then my question is, well, why don't you just marry them now? Right. Like, what is holding you back from just marrying them?
This question we're going to be on the same side on, because I agree.
Yeah. And so some people, like, I'll play devil's advocate just for a second. Some people will say, well, I am going to marry them. I'm engaged. We're just taking time to plan the wedding. And like, because of our, like, renting schedule and when our lease ends, like, this is what makes the most sense. And so for the people like who
fall into that category?
Yeah, fall into that category. I think for me, the only thing holding me back would be physical boundaries. But then I think for anyone who has any other reason, so for example, they've been engaged for 2 years, but they're not any closer to their wedding date, or they say that they're committed, but there's no ring. I would say at that point, like, you say you're committed, but like, why don't you just marry them?
Yeah, like, what is holding you back?
Yeah, and I just want to touch on, like, your point about marriage, Sania. To me, marriage is so special and so meaningful, and I know a lot of people don't take it the same way. They're like, marriage is a legal thing, and it is a construct made by humans, and so why do I need to be bound by what, like,
Society's saying you have to do,
especially like old society. These were rules and like a structure made by old people, and it might not fit our current day and age.
right?
And I just want to say, like, you can make that argument, but then on the flip side, at the end of the day, we as humans, we want to be seen and known and loved for who we are. We don't want to have to change. How special is it when someone loves you inside and out, every single part of you, and you don't have to change? Even they love you, like, for even the bad parts of you. When you have a love like that and a relationship like that, where you can be fully exposed and vulnerable, and they will love you for all the good things and the bad things, I think that's like a taste of what, like, a perfect marriage can be like. And of course, I don't think they're, like, we as humans, because, like, we all make mistakes, can maybe reach that, but I think at the end of the day, that's all what we really want. And a lot of times people don't buy into marriage because they're like, that's hopium. Like, you're selling us on a dream that can't actually exist. But I think that can. And so, like, I've bought the hopium. Like, I think everyone deserves that.
Yeah.
And everyone can have that.
I do.
And don't
say,
sell yourself short.
I feel like you can get that without the label of marriage, though.
That's crazy. That is crazy.
Like I don't know. I've seen some really. I think maybe because the people that I'm around right now, like, because they're the very pro not marriage. Even though I'm personally very marriage. Everything Ethan's saying, that's my like La La Land Delulu dreams.
Yeah.
But just the people that I'm around, when they argue against it, and they say, like, you can have that, and I have seen it in relationships. Like, people are fully committed. Like, we know our mutual friend, like, in very long-term committed relationships with not a ring, and like, they're planning to live together and things like that. And so I think it is possible to be loved for all parts of you, but I think, to come back to Ethan's point, like, it just feels different when you have that marriage label. So,
okay, I know I was saying, like, that's crazy, right? And I know, like, people, if you're listening and you take a very liberal stance on this, like, you're probably hating me right now. I want to defend myself just a little bit. Some people make it work, I agree. And some people don't like the construct of marriage. They don't like the idea of it. Like, why do I have to buy into this antiquated construct? And I think for those people, one of the main arguments is, like, I know what I have with the other person.
Right.
They know what they have with me. We've communicated it and we're on the same page. And that's why I genuinely think that marriage is not just between the two of you.
I agree.
Marriage affects everyone else. And so, yes, like, you guys can have figured out a construct that works for the two of you, and you don't call it marriage. But I think that you can be married and your marriage can look the way that you guys have defined it. It doesn't have to be the marriage that all the old people said you need to do. Like, you don't need to have a traditional wedding. You don't need to, like, have rings or anything. Like, your marriage can be what you two want it to be. But, like, outwardly, for, like, in terms of, like, your community and the way that people come around you and even support you, it looks different when it is defined in some way. And so I'm using marriage now as a way of defining like your inseparable bond, like you guys are one now, as opposed to this social construct.
That's true.
And
Okay.
so why are you so afraid of just calling yourself married? Like, you can let the other like preconceptions go.
Okay.
Your marriage can be how you want it to be,
Okay.
but there's no reason to stop other people from recognizing that you two are one.
Okay. You know what? If I was liberal, Ethan, I think you would have won me over with that. Because you're right. You should ask yourself the question of like, why are you not wanting to be one in everyone's eyes?
Right.
Forget
exactly.
about God's eyes if you're not very religious or spiritual.
Yeah.
Why don't you want to unify the two of you?
Right.
If everything else is there, if the relationship is as perfect as you deem it to be.
Right. And so, yeah.
I want to circle back just before we are done with this topic and just say one other very practical reason that somebody recently told me for living together. She's our mutual friend, and she was talking about like how she wants to live with her partner, and I was like, oh, that's like unexpected. And the reason I was told is like, well, we already spend like all of our time at each other's houses. Why are we paying two separate rents? Which, if you're from the Bay Area, like a heavy rent is part of like it should be somewhere on the matrix. Maybe not super important, but it is like a thing to consider.
Yeah.
Because like it's like nice to have a space. Like you guys are doing everything together anyways.
Yeah.
So it's like, why not save on rent?
I just think that, yes, you spend a lot of time together, and to you it feels like almost no difference to transition to living together. There is a big difference, like huge difference, because you might spend all your time together, but there are things when you spend all your time together and you share the same space that it doesn't come up. For example, how you decorate the place.
Oh, yeah.
Where you put your stuff and where they put their stuff. You spend time in each other's places, but your stuff is not, all your stuff is not at their place yet, right? Some of your stuff is probably there, not all. Like where you like organize, like, or how you organize the kitchen, where you put certain utensils and like certain like cooking equipment, like that stuff you don't know like how that's done. And then like splitting rent, like is one person gonna take care of it? Are you gonna split down the middle? Even if you split down the middle, a lot of times like one person is gonna pay first and then the other person will pay back. Sometimes you can like split even. But
Actually true.
There's a lot of things that that's coming your way that
maybe you didn't think about or consider.
And then there's still the physical boundaries, because you might spend a lot of time together. You might even like be having sex together, but it's very different. Like, are you gonna share the same bed? Like, having sex on the same bed is very different than like having sex on someone else's bed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
no, I get it. And just like the constantness, I think people don't think about that. Like even when you are with your partner, like let's say all weekend long, like how are you gonna make the alone time? Because it's easy when you're spending like the whole weekend at theirs and you're like, oh, okay, it's Monday, like I can like go be alone for a second.
Yeah.
But versus like if you're spending this continuation of time together and you need a moment to yourself and you can't, or you want to have a private call, not that you're going to talk about your partner, but like maybe you just need like girl talk with your mom. And it's like, how do you do that without making them feel like, hey, like I need to do this without you? So those are also potential challenges. And then like, does anything even feel special? Like, do you still do dates if you're like living together? I think that's always been like a big concern to me. And like that also comes up if you're seeing each other all the time and if you're always at each other's houses. It's like, well, what is the special date then? What is not part of your mundane everyday?
Yeah. I love that point because like when you save living together for marriage, you keep more things special for as long as possible.
Yeah.
And not saying like in marriage or once you live together, things don't become special anymore, but it just takes a lot more effort and intention.
Yeah. I think I'm happy with our discussion.
Yeah. That was a lot.
Yeah, it was.
Like, oh my goodness.
You're gonna need some coffee after.
I need to like take a walk. Okay, so we're gonna move into our end segment. We do want to say though that we are not trying to negate anyone's like point of view.
Yeah.
Like we are always open to hearing anyone and everyone out, and so like we don't mean to offend anyone. We're trying to do our best to share based on our experiences what we think can be helpful, and so we hope that you don't think we're trying to correct you or tell you there's only one right way, but we think that a lot of these things can be helpful for you. And so now we're actually going to ask ChatGPT what ChatGPT thinks about whether or not you should live with your partner before marriage. And based on our conversation so far, we're going to see what we agree with, what we don't agree with, and then just to get a third opinion.
Yeah, totally.
Actually, like more than a third. This is like the whole internet's opinion. Okay, so here we go. So I think ChatGPT like always does like a list of 7.
Okay.
So the very first one is learning compatibility. And we talked about this. And do you have like...
Any additional things?
Yeah, like maybe like an agree or disagree.
Okay, so right now we're going through the list of like, the pros of living together.
Yeah.
Learning compatibility, I think I'm going to have to disagree with that one. I think you're never going to ever be fully compatible or learn everything. So that's my reason for disagreeing.
Right. And even if you're not compatible about a certain thing, doesn't mean that the relationship is not meant to be or can't be worked out. Like I will say that I don't think I'm fully compatible with anyone.
Definitely. We're individual people.
And working through that a lot of times is what makes a relationship beautiful, because I learn about a person, I can adjust myself, and that makes us stronger understanding each other. Although that's what people would say about learning compatibility. Okay, the next one, conflict resolution practice.
I think I would disagree with this. I'm assuming, you're working on your conflict resolution like since day one. As soon as you face your first conflict, you're not waiting. I don't think living together gives you a special advantage of conflict resolution.
I think it might give you more practice, but I also agree with you.
That means more conflicts.
I also agree with you, Sania. And we'll touch on this in the next episode, but I think conflict resolution, where from a place of commitment, looks very different from conflict resolution from a place of non-commitment.
That's true.
And so this goes back to our conversation about commitment. But that's why you can be having conflict resolution practice, but it might not be helpful if you don't have a solid foundation to always come back to. Okay, financial insight.
Again, this is another thing I would agree with a little bit.
Yeah.
Just for how do they spend on their house? You can see how they spend on their shopping, on their clothes, but it's day to day. What is their expenditure? Are they in the shower for 2 hours at a time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this one's valid. And then the last one, strengthening the bond for pros.
Go ahead.
So I think it does strengthen your bond, but it has a danger of strengthening your bond too fast. And so
I feel like it can weaken the bond also.
Yes. Yeah. And so I think this one, it seems right at first, but if you don't do it properly, and I personally think doing it properly means in marriage, then it can weaken the bond very easily, because you're just going too fast, or there's no real commitment to fall back on.
I personally
anyone
think
can leave.
You can strengthen the bond without living together. That's why I don't think it's required.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so now going into the cons, we're going to talk about whether we agree or disagree. So first one, risk of complacency.
And the specific thing that they're saying is couples may slide into a marriage just because it's convenient. You're already living with this person. And I think that's totally possible. We were talking about how when you're in a marriage, it's harder to leave because, you're already married. You have to think more. Dude, if you're both are signed onto the same lease, equal pressure and equally harder to leave.
Yeah.
So definitely, I think I agree. There is a risk of complacency.
I totally agree too, and I think this is one of the big reasons why the divorce rate is getting higher and higher, because there is a lot of complacency in our dating culture.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Okay, the next one, conflict without commitment. Oh.
We've been talking about this all episode. Yes, ChatGPT. We agree.
Yeah. And so in the next episode, stay tuned for that. We're going to talk about how to do conflict with commitment. Mm-hmm. Okay, next one, cultural or religious values.
Okay, so I personally think for my personal religious beliefs, I think living together would be kind of like a pro, because I'm very pro sharing my culture. And having a space where I can pray, doing this and that, things that I do in my day-to-day routine that my partner doesn't see when I'm just seeing them. Mm-hmm. I feel like will help them. It will help integrate what I expect life to look like, or what I want life to look like.
I think this one's kind of 50-50. I think that can definitely happen, where they integrate, they become more accustomed to your culture and religion. But then at the same time, it can push them further away.
That's true. If they don't
Yeah, if they're not open-minded, if it feels too strong to them.
Yeah, if it feels overbearing. Mm-hmm.
So there is it depends on the person and not whether or not you're living together.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then the last one, potential legal complications.
That's the lease we were just talking about.
Right.
And people will argue, oh, marriage is legally binding, there's complications. But dude, a lease is super legal as well. Mm-hmm. What if your partner gets so mad, so upset, and they leave and they're good luck with rent. Mm-hmm. And you guys got a lease for a place that's way out of your budget. What are you actually going to do? What is the legal, what are you going to do?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. There have been situations that I've seen where people had to lawyer up. Mm-hmm.
And that's what happens when you have a divorce. So we're kind of doing the same thing.
I think especially in terms of emotions, I'm not saying it's at the same level, but it has huge emotional effects.
Right.
And then when you have to deal with lawyers and stuff, oh man, it's not
and
fun.
It's I'm not even married. Why am I dealing with this? Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks, ChatGPT. I think it gave us some more good things to think about.
Yeah, a lot of stuff that kind of reinforces what we talked about.
Yeah. They also have some questions to ask yourself. So we'll leave that on the screen for you guys to look at. But some of these could be helpful when you're thinking about living together or not. We're going to leave it there. Mm-hmm. We hope that this episode was good, to just get everyone to start thinking more about this. And I'm really both of us, we're really looking forward to the next episode where we'll talk about conflict resolution.
Yeah.
So we'll catch you guys for that one.